Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from the United States of the Great America, it's Mr. Brian Boom Boom Dunning.
Your queen wants you to listen to Skeptoid at Skeptoid.com, but only after you've listened to The Skeptic Zone. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com.
God bless you and all that sail in you, Brian.
Welcome to The Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to The Skeptic Zone for the 16th of November 2013, show number 265. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. Last night, oh man, the thunder and the lightning. It was a classic horror movie lightning sheets going across the sky vertically, horizontally, upside down. Well, I was upside down or something. It was pretty full on. It was a lot of fun. But enough about the weather report. Coming up on this week's episode of The Skeptic Zone, Maynard interview, two-part. You get two Maynards for the price of one this week. The first part of Maynard, right at the top of the show, Maynard's going to be chatting to Brian Dunning from the Skeptoid Podcast. Now, we've been noticing that lately, Brian has been producing a lot of stories about Australia. Curious goings-on. Like the Tasmanian Tiger, the Westall UFO, the disappearance of pilot Frederick Valentich, who, some say was taken by a UFO. Why is Brian so interested in Australia? We'll find out. Maynard will ask the hard questions. Well, the fun questions anyway. Find out why Brian Dunning is concentrating on Australia. And good on him for doing so. Following part one of Maynard, as the parrots are singing out. Hang on. That's better. Open the window. Where was I? Listening to the parrots outside. Following part one of Maynard, we have A Week in Science with Dr. Paul Willis from the Royal Institution of Australia, www.riaus.org.au. And, you know, I really should go and visit that institution one day. I really should. And following that, I interview an old friend of mine, Bob Blaskiewicz from Wisconsin. He's going to be talking about the Burzynski Clinic. Yeah, the claims of curing cancer, and a major story that's broken on USA Today, all about that clinic. Very worthwhile interview. Stay tuned for that. And to round off the show, part two of Maynard. Yes, a double-barreled Maynard this week. Well, Maynard finds some interesting people, to say the least, and he's going to be talking to somebody he met at Skeptic Camp who wants to marry their car. Beep, beep. Yes, Maynard talks to Kate Alway about her plans to marry her car. Why, you ask? Find out later on in the show. Now, some great news for you people down in Victoria, down in Melbourne. Morty Skeptics in the Pub on Tuesday the 19th of this month, which is only in a few days, are going to be hosting Professor Christopher French, who's out here for the National Skeptics Convention. If you want to see Chris French talk before the convention, go to www.meetup.com/Morty-Skeptics-in-the-pub. Google Morty Skeptics, or just follow the link on the show notes for this week. Now, it wasn't that long ago where I was a guest of the Morty Skeptics in the Pub, and what a great night I had down there. Well worth it if you're in the area. That's just down south of Melbourne. And thank you to those people who have re-signed for the Skeptic Zone for the subscriptions, because I had to change the PayPal account. Most people have done that, I'm very pleased to say. And just for general interest out there, of all the people who listen to the Skeptic Zone, less than 1% subscribe. Chuck in less than $1 a week or a bit more to help the Skeptic Zone. Interesting. Less than 1%. But believe me, I am grateful for those people who do. If you didn't, there would be no Skeptic Zone. It's as simple as that. And if you want to help the Skeptic Zone, and it's people like you who were able to cover Maynard's hotel costs for the upcoming convention, so he can bring you more great reports over the next weeks. Just visit www.skepticzone.tv and follow the PayPal links. Well, now it's time for me to run downstairs, see if I got some parrot pie left in the fridge. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
Look, we've just had a huge day here. Melbourne Cup, of course, and when we think of Melbourne Cup and horse races, we think of Brian Dunning. How are you, Brian?
I am excellent. How are you?
I believe you are an ex-jockey.
I would break the horse's back.
Have you actually, has Dunning ever spent any time at the track as a sceptical man who looks for evidence? Have you ever put a bet on there on the track, Brian?
I have to say I have not, although that's probably one of the more science-based forms of gambling that one might be able to do.
That's true. Oh, how about the greyhounds or the trots? What do you get into there?
I don't even think we have those here on this side of the pond, do they? I don't know.
Oh, you've got to go to a greyhound meeting. There's a lot of people that look like Arthur Daly from that show Minder. A lot of people like that hanging around in colourful suits. It's a great time. Look, I'm just recovering from, yes, because you heard me mucking around at the Melbourne Cup and you didn't know what it was, whether it was a football game or anything.
I heard Melbourne Cup, and I saw the report. I watched the entire thing, and at no point was it mentioned what the Melbourne Cup is. And I figured it out. I thought it was probably a horse race, but wasn't quite sure.
Now, I'm ringing you because, look, you're doing a lot of pandering. A lot of pandering at the moment, Brian. You're doing a lot of Australian-based Skeptoid stories. Now, Skeptoid has been running, I think, for the last 20 years. And suddenly, there's all these Australian episodes. Are you pandering to us? What's going on?
I am. I'm desperately trying to receive an invitation to come visit. No, just I do a different subject every week, and I've done some 370 something episodes now, and it just so happened that there were a few Australian legends in the pipeline. So. It wasn't really by design, but there's been some interesting stuff from down under.
Australians go nuts for Skeptoid. It's like smoking ice. Like if you can't smoke ice, you listen to Skeptoid here in this country.
It is really bizarre. I do a lot of reporting on where the listeners come from, and they're really out of proportion. Australians are by far the most common listeners to the show per capita. I have no explanation for why that is, other than they're just far more intelligent than the rest of the world.
Do you think it might have been because of the way you were able to bust a move at TAM Australia? The way you were dancing?
I danced there, and that was held in a Masonic lodge, if I believe, because that was the room that was available for that size of group, and I did a great pose standing there in their great big ceremonial throne at the front of the room, and people photoshopped lightning bolts onto my hands, and it was I think I convinced people that I have some sort of supernatural powers.
Well, it was a big blowout because you were there, George Harub was there, we had the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe people there, and it was big because these were people that I'd never met before. I wasn't too aware of the shows that you all did, and it was a good introduction to a lot of people.
Oh, and for us, it was a great introduction to so many great Australian skeptics, like Dr. Carl. I mean, he's virtually unknown in the United States, and we just had a smashing time.
Now you've looked at the Tasmanian Tiger, and what else you got planned as you're pandering to the Aussies?
Well, in the last couple of weeks, I did a really interesting episode on the Tasmanian Tiger, in which I learned at least as much as listeners will. And the previous week, I did the disappearance of Frederick Valentish, the young pilot who disappeared in 1978, and people thought he was abducted by aliens.
No, we'll get back to that. I've got a few questions for you, Brian. There's a few things you overlooked in your so-called report.
Okay.
But and what else you been? What do you got planned? Can you spill the beans?
I have. I'm 3 or 4 episodes ahead. There's let's see, the one that came out today was the visiting. Who was the first to reach the New World by sea? Was it one of the various claims from Europe, or was it possibly a claim from China? Christopher Columbus is, of course, widely accepted, but there's other claimants to that prize as well. And then the next one is also.
I'd be putting a bet in on the Egyptians.
You're not far off. There are claims from just about everywhere, except Australia. I think they were late to the party. I don't think the Aboriginals were paddling their canoes quite that far yet.
No, they were happy nomads, just sort of rode. They did a bit of seafaring around the Torres Strait and everything, but I don't think they went intercontinent. But but they could have. I could be wrong about that.
One of the things I learned about the Aboriginals spreading through down into Australia and bringing the dingoes with them from Asia, that was what contributed to the extinction of the Tasmanian tiger from mainland Australia. And that was something that I hadn't known.
Yes, and also they're trying to keep an eye on the fox population in Tasmania too, because they didn't have foxes down there, and one or two of them got off a boat or something, stowed away on a boat, or it was a couple of years ago, and they've got a little bit of a fox problem turning up down there.
Wow, I did not know that.
That's only new. But let's look at this Valentich case. Now, would you like to explain what was the alleged Skeptoid take on this? Because it's a fairly famous one.
It is, but the conclusion that I reached is not something that I had found reported anywhere else. The basic story is he's a young man, 20 years old, rented a plane, was going to fly to Tasmania, and disappeared while over the water. And that by itself is not especially unusual. What is unusual is that just before he disappeared, he reported a UFO. He was talking to, I believe, Melbourne, and he was reporting a UFO was hovering above him and flying around him. And then that was one of his final transmissions before he unfortunately crashed into the water. And what... you want me to spill the beans? You want me to tell you what I found out?
Because it's never been found, I don't think you can definitively say he crashed into the water.
No, the plane was found.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Pieces did wash up. Let's see. I've got the.
That's right. I stand corrected by the power of Dunning. But there's two things that, or maybe three things you didn't mention in the story that maybe you've got an explanation for. And that was at the end of his broadcast and his transmission, and no one has heard it. I think his father had it played to him, but there's only a transcript. But at the end of that transcript, there's about 17 seconds of a metallic grinding sound.
Right, and you're correct. I didn't happen to mention that. I've done a number of air crash episodes for one reason or another, half a dozen or so of them, and these flight recordings are always a part of the investigation, and when the plane crashes, there's always strange sounds at the end of the recording. And this was not a flight recorder, of course. This was coming over the radio. Who knows what that was? It's just the radio could have been in the water and it made a strange sound. We don't know. But I just didn't happen to mention that. I didn't find that told us anything at all, because it's not at all unexpected for there to be strange sounds at the end of a transmission like that.
And the other two incidents that go along with the Valentich case is that there was a small family group that seemed to view what they claimed was a light plane, matching the roughest description of the one that he had, the Cessna, and some sort of light above it going down at a 45-degree angle. A group of three people claim that they saw that from the coastline around about that time. Did you uncover that?
I did, and I also found some photographs that someone took looking out that direction.
That's right. There was a photographer taking some time-lapse photos of the sunset, and there was some interesting splodges around about that time on a negative. What did you make of that, Brian?
Well, they clearly had no remote relation to what Valentich was describing, so I have no idea what those pictures were of, but I found no reason at all to connect those to what happened. And this similar thing with the family reporting something. He was too far away from the land for anyone to have visually observed what was going on. So I decided not to even bring those into the conversation, because I just couldn't see that they were reliably relevant.
And what about the conflicting reasons he gave for flying to, I believe it was King Island? There was a few different reasons there. What do you think was going on?
Yeah, that was awfully strange. He told his family that he was going to pick up crayfish, and he told the airport he was going to pick up some friends.
Yeah, he was going to pick up people, and now he had he flown at night before over water like this?
He had never flown at night over water. He did have a type of instrument rating, but this is the first time he'd ever actually flown at night over water. And just as what happened to John F. Kennedy Jr., trying to fly outside of your flight envelope, that's unfortunately when accidents like this happen the most often.
Okay, well, I'm sticking with the grand UFO theory at the moment. It doesn't have.
I'm sticking to my theory that I came up with at the end of my episode.
Well, look, this whole evidence thing, Brian, you've got to get away from that.
No, but actually, what I came up with was more interesting. And interesting than saying there was a UFO. And
I will point people to that episode and have a listen and join the conversation about that. Have you got much of a reaction to that one?
Not so much. It's not one of the types of episodes that really excites people's passions. There are always a few people who are dedicated UFO believers who insist on a UFO being the explanation for everything, and there were comments from them. But otherwise, it's more of an episode where we're just learning interesting history, and it's like, wow, that's really cool. I didn't know this particular fact. It's not the kind of thing that brings out the crazies quite as often.
One of the ones,
which is a nice respite for me.
One of the ones that you did a while back that was a very Australian. I think it's the biggest mass UFO sighting we had in Australian history, was the Westall 66 sighting in Melbourne. Yeah,
and in fact, that happened at the same airport where Frederick Valentish took off from, Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne. The 1966 Westall UFO was the strange sightings reported from a school, and a bunch of school children supposedly came up with made all of these reports, and there are stories saying that then government officials came to the school and told everyone to shut up, and things like this, and television documentaries have been made kind of promoting these sort of conspiratorial angles and these versions of the story that are greatly magnified and changed from what was reported at the time. You know, we're here 50 years later, and the stories have just changed quite a lot. And if you go back to what was actually being reported and talked about in 1966, you get a whole different story than if you go to what people are saying now 50 years later. Which is, largely, who knows what the source of what they're saying today is. But it's not what they were talking about in 1966. And that proves to be a whole new interesting story all by itself.
But, Brian, do you think with a mass sighting like that, often I run into this with people from the skeptical movement, they're almost a little bit quick to dismiss eyewitness accounts. And I know people can be fooled easily, but, you've got to wonder there might be something there.
Well, you've started with a faulty assumption in your comment just now. You said a mass sighting. And when you go back to what was reported in 1966, it was not a mass sighting. Only a very few people at the school saw anything, and what they all saw was in different directions and was described very differently. And we now have a pretty good idea of what each of these different people saw. What's reported today is that some giant spaceship came down in the field and hundreds of school children ran over and they all witnessed it, and that simply bears no resemblance to the original version of the story.
Is this fairly typical of mass sightings around the world? They get blown out like that over time?
It is typical. What also happens in many cases is that one particular person will be sort of the caretaker of the story and will be the person who writes and researches and reports, and this person's own impression of what he thinks happened will become the popular version of the story. So in many cases we have reports of many people having witnessed something that is really just kind of the wishful thinking of one particular person who sort of creates the legend. We have the whole famous Roswell story here in the United States, and that was also created largely by one person.
there is actually one bit of testable evidence in the Westall 66 sighting, which is overlooked even in the documentary. There's apparently a girl who came close to what this object was and became unconscious and sick and was taken away in an ambulance and never returned. Now, to me, that sounds like you could hunt that down. There must be a record somewhere of that.
Well, if something like that had happened, I'm sure there probably would be a record. There isn't. There's really no reason to think that that is anything but a modern invention. There's certainly no reference to anything remotely like that from the 1966 reports.
What's the most controversial, in this case, UFO case that you've covered on Skeptoid that really just people hammered you? Oh, Brian, get onto the house.
Well, that might be one of them.
Really?
The Westall UFO is something that the people who really believe in it firmly take it very seriously, and it's an important, passionate part of their lives. I would say comparable to that is the Rendlesham Forest UFO, which happened in the UK. There was an American Air Force base inside the UK. What is reported is that a spaceship with colored lights came down in the trees, and Air Force men went over to it and touched it and measured its footprints in the ground and had all of this hard evidence, and they took an audio recording of their adventure. And the people who believe this story are also extremely passionate. And when I talk about the story from the perspective of what we've actually been able to find through researching what the real evidence is and what was actually reported at the time, when I talk about it from that perspective, people get furious. If you're doing anything but promoting this sort of pop culture sensationalized version, some people can get extremely passionate, and it's kind of weird.
and what do you make of the audio recording that was made at the time? It's obvious that they're seeing something and they're alarmed.
Yeah, I'll get the same. I'll get the same sort of feedback for saying it now, but what's in the audio recording, it's available, you can listen to the whole thing, is that they were going through the trees and they saw the Orford Ness Lighthouse blinking off in the distance. And I took a recording of that audio and played it alongside a beep, which I played every 5 seconds, representing the blinking of the lighthouse. And every time you hear that beep, you hear the guys in the recording say, "Oh, there it is again! Oh, there it is again!" And when you line the two up, it's quite obvious that they're seeing a 5-second flashing light. There's nothing in the recording that supports the version of the story that's told today, which is that a spaceship came down and landed and guys went up and touched it. That's apparently just simply made up by some of these guys years and years and years later.
Oh, Brian, after all the excitement of the Melbourne Cup, you're bumming me out, man, with all this evidence of yours.
There's nothing. No. You're looking at it the wrong way. There is nothing to be bummed out by finding out what's really going on, because you always find new information that you didn't know before. If you heard this modern sensationalized version of the story, it's wrong. It's pseudo-history. That's not interesting. When you find out what actually happened, that's where the real fun is.
And also the real arguments online with you.
Indeed.
Look, we've got the big one coming up. Of course, it's the 50th anniversary of the assassination of JFK. We've got the big meeting in Canberra over that weekend. My friend Jay Katz is actually having a night at the Carousel Club at the Vanguard in King Street. He's in King Street, Newtown. They're going to recreate the Carousel Club from the night before. People can come as Secret Service agents, their favourite member of the Kennedy family, and people will be singing. They'll be screening some conspiracy films, and I will be going as a Secret Service agent.
Oh, my gosh, I want to go.
Look, it's going to be great, and people are going to be singing at the bars, having a great time there, and there'll be a screening of a couple of different theories on the night. And, of course, it's a big one. And now, have you covered this a number of times? Will you be revisiting it?
I have. The JFK is the granddaddy of all conspiracy theories. And what I've been doing since I started the show 7 years ago is trying to figure out how I'm going to do that episode.
Look,
I have all the information. It's you can't possibly cover all of the different angles. I need to find a way to cover that story in my usual show length, which is about 10 minutes. and actually add something to the conversation.
Yeah, it's almost like you've got to grab one fact of it or one anomaly.
I may have to. I mean, I could also break it up into 50 different episodes for covering 50 of the many hundreds of different conspiracy theories that have been suggested about it. I don't know how I'm going to do it, quite frankly.
We just had the one screened here where they floated the theory that it was an accidental shot of one of the Secret Service agents who didn't have the assault rifle near the car on safety, and that's what.
Right. I've only learned about that one recently. Of course, there's a 1,600-page book, which is the magnum opus about the JFK assassination by Vince Bugliosi, and at 1,600 pages, that needs to be my main research source material. I don't know how I'm going to squeeze that into my schedule.
I did an interview with someone who had a great theory a few years ago. It's on the Maynard.com.au website there. His theory is that it was the Cubans, and it's an 800-page book, and he went through the whole thing about that. So there's certainly some really weighty books on this.
Oh, and we're talking about the craziness of the UFO conspiracy people. It's the craziness of the Kennedy assassination people that takes the cake. I have heard of these conspiracy theory people becoming violent at conferences, confrontational. It's actually kind of scary. The people who take these theories so personally, and they take them like religion. So it's going to be really interesting when I do that episode.
Look, I had a very interesting day last year or the year before. I spent it with a friend of mine, and I spent it with Richard Saunders. And the friend said to me, so Richard Saunders doesn't think that it's possible that JFK was actually assassinated by his own government. I said, yes, that's what Richard Saunders thinks. And then later on in the day, Richard Saunders said, really, do people really think that JFK was assassinated? That's such a bizarre idea. And I had the mirror conversation with both of them. It was a really interesting day. But, heads of state through the centuries have been assassinated, Brian. It's not something that is impossible.
Yeah, I will often hear, well, here, look at Julius Caesar. He was assassinated by a conspiracy of his own government, and if that can happen, then why couldn't this happen? And the answer that I like to give for that sort of explanation, that sort of support for a conspiracy theory, is that never existed as a conspiracy theory. That was a crime that was committed and was discovered on the spot. There was never any period of time where conspiracy theorists suspected that was what had happened and it hadn't yet been discovered. So claims like that are very poor support for the idea that there is some hidden shadow conspiracy that's existed for, decades now being undiscovered. I have yet to find a conspiracy theory that exists only as a conspiracy theory that turns out to be true. I've never heard of one.
Well, what about all that massive spying the NSA is doing on everyone? If I'd said that to you a couple of months ago, you'd go, oh, Maynard, you're stretching the truth a little bit. They're not really collecting metadata on anyone they can possibly collect it on. And they are.
I'm not sure. Well, first of all, if you had made a specific suggestion, then I would be really, really, really impressed. If you had just said the NSA spies on U.S. citizens, I would have answered, well, of course, that's what the NSA does. That's their charter. That's why they exist. There's no surprise there. But if you had mentioned that if you gave some very specific, like it turns out that they were collecting Google searches by a wiretap on this particular fiber optic going across the Pacific, then I would have been impressed that you proved to be correct with that particular prediction. But it's not good enough to just make some vague statement about the government is doing something evil and someday it's going to come out because, well, of course that's true. You need to be more specific.
But that's how I earn my living, Brian. The vague statements are my living, you see. You just put a vague statement out there and then you retrofit it. And sometimes it's humorous and sometimes it works. I will recommend, probably skeptics might not be so into it, but the very first theory on JFK that came out in a documentary form, Rush to Judgment. And I recommend one scene in that. That's where the journalist is talking to the very cool black piano player from the Carousel Club. And he's interviewing him about what happened at the Carousel Club the night before. But he's actually playing the piano while he's answering the questions. And he goes, so were there secret agents there? And he goes, yeah, ding, 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 ding. They were there, ding, ding, ding. Very cool scene. I recommend that.
Can you tell whether he's lying by whether his piano playing gets faster or slower?
Well, I guess it's a bit like a lie detector or something, isn't it? There's some very colourful characters in that doco.
I'd like to see it.
I'll send you that. We should post it up on somewhere. And look, I want to talk to you about, of course, In Fact. This is where you have done some special videos. In fact, I think there's even in Here Be Dragons. There's even a scene of you in bed.
Yeah, there's the In Fact video series is where I take selected Skeptoid episodes that are particularly provocative and controversial, and I turn them into a short 3-minute YouTube video. Episodes that get people really angry, like fracking, aspartame, fluoride, global warming, GMOs, things like that. And that's always good because I get tons of negative feedback on YouTube. And if you don't get negative feedback, you're not doing something right.
And are you going to be making any more in the near future? The In Facts?
Absolutely. Since I'm a full-time science writer and podcaster, basically, and doing video takes extra time and resources that I don't have. So there's a little thermometer on the infactvideo.com website that once that gets filled with donations for an episode, then I can afford to take the time and make each episode. So yeah, I make an episode every time that gets filled. Usually it takes a month or two between episodes, but yeah, I plan to continue making them. They're lots of fun. Because
I want to tell people that they should support Skeptoid because at some weeks you have to eat the processed cheese. You can't get the good proper cheese. You have to get the cheese slices, and the family's going hungry. So people should hit the tin for Skeptoid.
People tend to forget that people like Richard Saunders and like me that do this for a living. I mean, we depend on people donating and supporting the show. It's not something that just happens freely and it's there for people to consume. It is there freely for people to consume if they want to do that, but it depends on the people who choose to sort of join our mission and help us make these shows a reality. It absolutely does live and die based on whether or not people support it, and so it's you're not far off. It's a big drop in income for me and my family from when I was doing consulting before, but it's so worthwhile. I enjoy it so much.
Look, you were consulting to a lap dancing club, so it's probably a better thing you're doing now.
I definitely did some interesting consulting in my day.
Yeah, Brian Boom Boom Dunning.
You might be closer to the truth than you suspect.
Would you like to
away from that subject?
Would you like to watch Brian pander on the main stage, or would you like a private pander? See. No? And that's the ER kind, not the DA kind. Look, although I still am mad with you about the whole Vril thing, I was on board with the whole Nazi UFOs are so hot right now thing, thinking the Vril was an actual occult movement, but oh no, Brian Dunning comes along and tells me it is actually a book, a fictional book that people were basing their beliefs on. And
yes, but there was a Vril society. It was just... it was basically one of these weird clubs in Berlin in the 1920s where people got naked and drank and did weird things, and they gave it some occult-sounding name.
So it was like the German version of the Hellfire Club in Sydney. Is that what it is?
Well, that sounds like something I need to investigate further.
They've got a photo of you up in the dressing room.
Do they?
Yes, very nice one too. Good shorts.
Why do I not know these things?
Well, because, see, you got up to a lot when you were here. The footprint of Dunning.
I don't remember.
The footprint of Brian Dunning across the nightlife of Sydney was amazing. But please, continue.
Let's see. What the newest thing I've got going right now is the fifth book. Every so often I'll take 50 of the best Skeptoid episodes and I'll compile them into a book and adapt them and everything. And I've just got number 5 is coming out. It should be available later this month, which is called Massacres, Monsters, and Miracles. It's a whole collection of awesome stories in a book, and books are nicer than podcasts in that you can give them to your grandma. And it's really a huge amount of work, and I'm thrilled that it's finally going to be over with within a couple of weeks when we get them sent out. But Massacres, Monsters, and Miracles, check your Amazon.com soon.
Keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for In Fact. And what's the website, and where do we need to go, Mr. Dunning?
You need to go to Skeptoid.com, and you can catch all the latest episodes, those from Australia, those not from Australia. Don't forget, we've got the Min Min Light, we've got Picnic at Hanging Rock, all kinds of great Aussie stories on there.
Oh, can I do the sign-off? That's right. You're Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com.
That was eerily accurate.
Did you see that UFO sighting that made the news? What did that latest study about alternative treatments really say? Is this photo making the rounds real or a hoax? Doubtful News is a unique website featuring news about pseudoscience, the paranormal, anomalies, and questionable claims, framed with a skeptical view. Come visit doubtfulnews.com every day for news about cryptozoology, conspiracies, shams, scams, and more. Follow us on Twitter at Doubtful News. Critical thinking is essential in assessing today's news. Doubtful News helps you decide, can you really believe this stuff?
Welcome to A Week in Science from RiAus, bringing you the science news you need to know. Stabbed in the head during sex, smelly hyenas, and the Olympic torch reaching new heights? It's been another great week in science. You're having a nice, quiet cuddle, and then BAM! Along comes a stab in the head. Well, that's what happens in certain species of sea slug, which are hermaphrodites. That's when each slug is both male and female. While the slugs are mating, they push a syringe-like appendage into each other's forehead, injecting each other with secretions from their prostate glands. Researchers aren't clear why this sea slug stabbing soissons neuf occurs, but it could help with such things as increasing egg production. Some days, I'm grateful for being a human. Researchers have linked specific human actions to changes in global warming. They found that global warming slowed down in the 1990s, which is directly linked to the 1987 Montreal Protocol that banned ozone-depleting substances like CFCs. They also found that warming slowed during the 2 World Wars and the Great Depression, when the poor economy limited our greenhouse gas emissions. However, warming spiked again in the 1960s as the economy improved and we got back on our feet. You're listening to A Week in Science from RiAus. And now, 4 science headlines in 30 seconds. Depression may make you age faster by shortening your telomeres, the part of DNA that controls when cells die. A compound has been found that forces bacteria to digest themselves, providing hope in the fight against antibiotic-resistant superbugs. The Olympic torch has been taken for a spacewalk outside the International Space Station by 2 astronauts. And the scent glands of hyenas contain special bacteria that help them to communicate, with the female scent changing according to her reproductive stage. November's Science Behind the Headlines will be looking at 2 of the most pressing public health issues in Australia: depression and anxiety. With 1 in 4 Australians likely to have mental health issues in their life, our expert panel will look at mental health and analyse how the media deals with it. Details on our website. That's it for this A Week in Science. For more information on these and other science news stories, go to the RiAus website, riaus.org.au. Follow us on Twitter using the hashtag WeekInSci and like us on Facebook. I'm Paul Willis, and I'll catch you next week.
Hey guys, This is Jay from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. And whoa, hold on, whoa! Everybody knows I'm the only reason to listen to the freaking show, right? I mean, if it was up to me, the show would start with this. Yeah, boy! Well, Rebecca would hate that, probably, but, I mean, I'd rock that. Listen to our show and you can learn about cool stuff like a technological singularity, which is someday when technology progresses so fast that it would make the Industrial Revolution look like a kid's science project. Anyway, come check us out at www.theskepticsguide.org and get your science on!
Well, friends, hot off the presses, as it were, there's breaking news coming out of America, and I've got an old friend of mine, Bob Blaskiewicz, all the way from Wisconsin, although I'm pretty sure I bumped into him in Atlanta and Las Vegas. Hello, Bob.
Hey, Richard.
We did have some fun times at DragonCon, didn't we?
Oh, we certainly did. I once helped you give a dowsing demonstration. I couldn't find the hidden water. It was great.
You mean your dowsing powers escaped you at the time? That's terrible.
Yeah. I couldn't perform under pressure.
It's an old story. Well, it's good to catch up with you because there is some interesting news coming out of the States only in the last few hours, as it were. And this has to do with a story that skeptics have been following for a long time with a guy who says he can cure cancer, or that's the impression he gives, one Stanislav Burzynski, if I've got that right.
Yep, Stan Burzynski, known to his friends as Stash.
Stash?
Yeah. He sells a concoction called antineoplastins. He is the one who discovered them in blood and urine. He is the one who manufactures it. He's the one who prescribes it. And he's the one who dispenses it. It's all in-house operation. And he's been treating patients under the auspices of clinical trials for the last 15 years, the only way that he can legally do it. And there were, in the last week, Tim Farley released our friend Tim Farley from Atlanta released Form 483s, which are FDA inspection notes about Burzynski himself as an investigator, and they found a whole host of irregularities in the way that he was carrying out his investigations. Irregularities that might render the trials problematic if they were ever to, attempt to publish.
This is a classic story of somebody who set up a clinic and people from around the world who are in desperate need, and we're talking about people with bad news about cancer who maybe aren't doing so well with their traditional orthodox treatment, are flying, getting money and going to this Burzynski fellow and paying an awful lot of money. Yeah,
it costs at least $15,000 to $20,000, somewhere in there, to start treatment, and up to $7,000 or more per month. Thereafter, it's not covered by insurance. We don't have national health here. It's a severe hardship on patients, and they often turn to their communities for help to pay for this expensive treatment, which is, after 36 years, still unproven. And what has gotten American skeptics so excited has been the front page story that appeared in USA Today, the most widely circulated paper in the U.S. And it was not a good day for Stan Burzynski. The reporter brought more skepticism and nuance to the story than anybody I've seen in a long time, actually ever, really. It was a wonderful story.
Well, just for the benefit of our listeners, what I'll do now is I'll play a quick clip from the video that accompanies that story on USA Today.
For 36 years, a Houston doctor named Stanislaw Burzynski has made a remarkable claim. He says he's found the secret to curing cancer with drugs that he isolated from human urine. Yet a USA Today investigation has found those claims may be too good to be true. Burzynski calls these drugs anti-neoplastins and describes them as natural, non-toxic, and extremely effective. Burzynski has publicly claimed that he can cure up to half of patients with inoperable brainstem tumors, which other doctors describe as almost universally fatal.
So that's just a little grab there from the video that accompanies the story in USA Today. That's pretty big news, actually. If that's a story on that outlet, some people are taking notice.
I think so. The reaction online today was, at least on the Twitter hashtag, was uniform outrage and disbelief. And that's what you'd expect when somebody puts on a performance like that for so long. I think it's the appropriate response. We hope to ride the wave, as it were, to see that the loopholes that allowed him to operate like this for so long are investigated and closed. That's really what we want to see. Burzynski is a symptom of a larger problem. We want to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Now, if I remember correctly, there was a fellow in the UK, quite a young blogger, 14 or 15 or so, who was blogging about this, and I guess it was a sort of a Streisand effect when the clinic tried to shut him up.
Yeah, that was Rhys Morgan. He's a Welsh kid who, man, is just a fireball when it comes to writing about alternative medicine. And he saw that somebody was raising money in his area for Burzynski's treatment. He looked into it and he saw what skeptics have since seen. In fact, some people, Peter Bowditch has been following it forever. He's been on this for forever. But he saw what other people said. He wrote about it, and he received legal threats. Well, not actual real legal threats, but pseudo-legal threats from somebody who had been hired by Burzynski to clean up his web reputation. That didn't work.
It certainly didn't. It backfired big time. In fact, it got a lot of bad publicity for the clinic, which was very pleasing to see at the time. But it's not an easy thing to speak out sometimes, because you do run the risk of people issuing either fake, but in sometimes real legal threats.
It's true. That's something that has been on the mind of skeptics who've been involved with this for the last 2 years. It's been almost exactly 2 years since Rhys and other bloggers were threatened. And we are, well, you do your due diligence. You know that anything that you say, anything that you write could be legally discoverable. You make sure that you're above board and you stick to the facts. And you bring in as little interpretation as humanly possible. You want to put everything out there in an objective way as possible.
Yes, I think that's very good advice, because there are some people out there who, very well-meaning skeptics and people on our side who it's very difficult, and I can appreciate where they come from. They want to say something, but sometimes you really, really have to exercise great restraint and great patience too, I think. You can't make things happen overnight.
Certainly. This is a long game. He's been doing this for a long time. It's not going to be remedied overnight. One of the principles that one of the kind of fundamental skeptical readings I try to make sure people read, and I know Skeptical Inquirer, the magazine, does this for its new authors, is to share Ray Hyman's work about communicating skepticism about extraordinary claims. And one of the things he says is know thy stuff, and do your homework and anticipate objections, and let the facts speak for themselves, because your arguments are more persuasive when the conclusions are arrived at in the head of your audience. So we try to practice that. One of the things that I do with some other skeptics is a website called the Other Burzynski Patient Group. And one of the biggest recruiting tools that Burzynski has benefited from has been the Burzynski Patient Group. Now, these are people who went to Burzynski. They're former patients. Many of them are survivors. Some of them are parents of kids who haven't survived, but they're still supporters. And their stories are extremely, extremely convincing. And one thing that happens when you start examining the stories of cancer patients, I don't have much experience with it in my family. I don't know anyone who's had cancer. But you see that these families, when they get this bad news, they reach out to one another and they cling to other families who are going through the same thing. And the internet makes that very easy. Well, what happens is they contact the clinic and somehow get in contact with former patients of the clinic, and they are brought into the new cancer family. And it's very convincing. These stories are very convincing, and for a long time there was no counter-narrative out there. So we set up the Other Burzynski Patient Group for the patients who didn't make it. And we have scoured social media, the internet, old news databases, Twitter, and Facebook, and we do everything that we can to bring these stories to life. And we don't, editorialize very much, honestly. We just let the patients tell their stories. They can't, for the most part, they can't tell their own stories because they haven't made it. But we feel that the stories of the people who didn't make it are the most persuasive stories that we can tell. Absolutely right. It reminds me, in a way, of something that James Randi wrote many years ago in a book called The Faith Healers, where he investigated people after they've been to a faith healer and found that they fall into three categories. The first category are the people who never had the disease in the first place they claimed they were cured of. The second category was the people who still had the disease despite being healed by a faith healer. And the third category were deceased. That's something that skeptics can do is write about write the stories of the people who didn't make it. We have seen for decades the FDA, the Texas Medical Board, and the prosecutors in Texas fail to protect patients, and we don't have the powers that they have, the legislative powers that are needed, the investigative legal powers that the police would have. But we can report and we can write and we can discover these stories and we can share them, and I think that's powerful. I think that's very powerful indeed, and it's good to see skeptics all over the world can actually get together when necessary and affect change. So I guess the question is to our listeners, what can they do? What can they do now to help this process or to shed light on this process? Yeah, well, very important things are really just to write about Burzynski and to use some SEO, search engine optimization strategies, to get good information in front of patients who might be looking for him. And at the website, the HoustonCancerQuack.com, at the top of the page, you'll see a link to tips for writing about Burzynski and his treatment. Good link keyword combinations that work very well, and we can boost good content into Google and that's something anyone can do. In the U.S., since we're going to be pushing for legislative reform, I think, and people can get in contact with me, and I will put them on an action list. That's a great idea. What I'll do in the show notes for our listeners is I'll put those URLs or those websites we were mentioning before, the ones from USA Today and the other ones, so they can easily get the information. Well, Bob, it's good to see that this person is getting the right sort of publicity for a change. We're delighted. It was a good day. It is a good
A good day indeed. Bob, great to talk with you, and I hope we can catch up soon at some interesting convention somewhere.
I hope so too, Richard. Thanks very much.
Astronomy Cast takes a facts-based journey through the cosmos as it offers listeners weekly discussions on astronomical topics ranging from planets to cosmology. Hosted by Fraser Kane of Universe Today and myself, Dr. Pamela Gay of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, this show brings the questions of an avid astronomy lover directly to an astronomer. Together, Fraser and I explore what is known and being discovered about the universe around us. Join us each week as we take a facts-based journey through the cosmos at astronomycast.com.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
We're just in the pub after Skeptic Camp 2013, and suddenly I hear out of the corner of my ear that someone's getting engaged to their car. Now, I can't let this one pass. You just had a few too many drinks. What's going on? And who are you? And why are you engaged to your car?
My name's Kate Alway. My car's name is Bee. She is a 1971 Bug, bright orange, and we've been together for 14 years.
So it's actually a Volkswagen Beetle, 1971.
Absolutely.
What colour? White?
Bright orange. I do as much of the mechanical work myself as I can manage. Still learning after 14 years.
You've worked on this relationship then. I can see why you want to sort of legally consummate it with this sort of marriage thing. Why are you doing that?
As somebody who doesn't believe in legal institutions of marriage as being a particularly helpful thing, I've gotten involved in lots of arguments. And when I realised I had started bringing up how my car would be a better, more reliable, more tested relationship, that if I'm going to ever marry anyone, it should be my car of 14 years, I started thinking that maybe there's something in this.
Now, what is the issue you have with legalised marriage? Is it the whole possession thing? What is it?
Having the state be the one to decide what relationship is valid, what relationship is not valid, what rights people get, what the category of trouble you're going to get on trying to dissolve the relationship. All these things, the rules that the government makes and that neoliberal governments today do tend to make don't really apply to us. As it stands, you could only marry someone of the opposite gender. Now, notwithstanding that this is eventually going to change, it's still, whatever they're going to do to replace that will still likely involve an idea of there being two genders, nothing in between, which still pigeonholes us in a very, very fundamental way that most of us accept, but I think we shouldn't.
Which is why you're demanding a bit of is it autophilia or autoerotica? I don't know the exact term for marrying an automobile.
Well, yesterday was coming out day, so hey, I'm coming out right on air as asexual. So asexual people generally don't see the world in a sexual way. It's not what you do or what you don't do, or it's how you see the world. So when I see people talking about marriage and saying it's a sexual thing, well, I'm a bit amused. It doesn't really relate to me anyway. So,
and actually, just as you said that, a hen's party walked in. On the very, very funny visual cue there. I'm enjoying this. This is a great discussion. I think we should have a few more drinks and have a chat about this. I think you should get a nice little engagement card together or something like that with you on the front.
I think I'll have to work on that.
There's a whole industry built around marriage. There's no reason why you can't subvert it to be you in the car.
Well, absolutely. Actually, I was just ended up talking to a marriage celebrant just the other day, just because we're at the vintage fair of all things, and she says that yes, you can celebrate anything. Celebrating your relationship to your car is a perfect thing to celebrate. Why not?
Yeah. Keep an ear out for this issue, people. This is good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ein großes Hallo an alle deutschen Zuhörer des Skeptic Zone Podcasts. Wusstet ihr, dass es auch in Deutschland einen Skeptikerverband gibt? Für weitere Informationen über uns und das Skeptiker Magazin besucht www.gwup.org. Ich wiederhole, www.gwup.org und unsere offiziellen Facebook, Twitter und Google Plus Seiten.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Well, one more week and I'm off to the National Skeptics Convention in Canberra. In fact, the next episode of the Skeptic Zone will be coming to you from Canberra, from sort of in the middle of the Skeptics Convention. I'll see if I can find time to put a show together and a few reports. Now, the dogs are barking outside. The parrots are screeching, the dogs are barking. I think there might be another storm coming, who knows. But for now, this is Richard Saunders, signing off from Sydney, Australia, where the dogs are barking, the parrots are screeching, and... Oh, hang on, wait a minute, here we go. I just noticed, I've been tidying up my office, and I just noticed the box of dice. So for those people who do write to me and ask me to do this, I'll do it again. Here we go. Oh, I've got my huge 20-sided dice I got from Dragon Con. Okay, here we go. So think of a number, folks. Think of the number from 1 to 20. I'll roll the dice, see if your psychic powers are working. Thinking of that number? Here we go. 9. Until next time, this is Richard Saunders, signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to The Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.